Alright students, this video is going to talk about slope-intercept form and how to graph. This is actually a bit of a shortcut compared to the graphing we've been doing, so it should be nice. First things, this is the general equation. Just write that down in your notes. It gives us these new variables. X and Y are what they always were. X is input, Y is output. But these things represent the slope and the y-intercept. Now what they actually are is their numbers. X and Y would be X and Y. Those are where you plug in numbers. This would be given to you generally. So for example, if given something like y equals 3x plus 1, 3 would be the slope, 1 would be the y-intercept. Now how exactly does that help us graph? Well, that's the key. We would still do, and we can always do with X and Y, you can always do a table of values. That will always work. So for this first one, we're going to do a table of values and make sure we know how it works. You can try any numbers you want in here, but the easiest number usually to try is 0, followed by 1, 2, or 3. We should probably try some negatives, but for today, for this video, I'm just going to do the positives. Now why 0? 0 is important. If you're on the x-axis, anywhere on the x-axis, that point is 1, 0. This point would be 2, 0. The next point would be 3, 0. In all these cases, your y coordinate is 0. So these are all x-intercepts. So if they're on the x-axis, they're an x-intercept. If they're on the y-axis, they're on the y-intercept. So when we plug 0 for x, we're actually going to find a y value. So when we plug 0 for x here, we'd have 3 times 0 plus 1. 3 times 0 would be 0 plus 1, which would be 1. So that's our first point. 0, 1 is our first point. So we're not going to use this graph. We're going to make a new graph. But that would be our first point. And this is actually a y-intercept because it will be on the y-axis. So let's put up a graph. So it's better if you have graph paper. If you don't, just make your x and y axis straight and try and keep this spacing even. It's better if you have graph paper. You'll notice the patterns a little more. But as long as you keep them evenly spaced and as long as you keep your axis straight, it should work out pretty nicely. Now, notice there's slight variations. These are slightly not the same size, and that one is a smaller size than these ones. That's what I'm talking about. On graph paper, these would be perfectly the same size. But for now, this is fine. Let's go back. Our first point, 0, 1. That's 0 in the x direction, 1 in the y direction. So it's a point on the y-axis. So that is why we call it our y-intercept. It's the point on the y-axis. It's where it crosses the y. Okay. We need more points. When we plug in 1 here, we'll get 3 times 1 plus 1. Now 3 times 1 would be 3. Plus 1 would be 4, so our next point would be 1, 4. That's another point. Over 1, up 4. We plug in 2, 3 times 2 plus 1. 3 times 2 would be 6, plus 1 would be 7. That's another point. Across x is 2, y is 7, so it would be up here. I can already tell we're running out of room. But we got 3 points, and if we did this right, it should be in a straight line. And if you don't have your ruler, take something straight. I'm taking envelope. But really, it's better to have a ruler. But there you go. That's a nice straight line. And that's what they should be. It should be a nice straight line in this chapter. Now, what did this slope tell us? Not much. Well, it did, actually. But we can't see it yet. The 1 was where it crossed. And what it is, if you notice, the change between these was plus 3, plus 3, plus 3. So this next number, even though we didn't fill it in, would be a plus 10. Over here is going plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. So how we would say this, we'd say that the y changed by plus 3, while the x changed by plus 1. That's the same as slope. We call it the change in y, the change in x. So x's was changing by 1s, while the y's were changing by 3s. We also call that rise over run. And altogether, this is all called slope. So I'd say our slope equals 3 over 1. Where do we see it on the graph? between any 2 points, if you want to go from here to here, count up 1, 2, 3 steps, and across 1 step. There's your slope. Go up 1, 2, 3, and across 1. There you go. And if you keep this pattern up, 1, 2, 3, and 1. Like I said, if you've got graph paper, then you're just counting boxes. Okay, just counting how many boxes up, how many boxes over. So 3 and 1 would be a slope, up 3 and across 1. That's going to be our shortcut. So for the next example, on the next video, we'll go ahead and use the shortcut. Thanks for watching. Try out the rest on your own.